some of the as to why we're here. If anything, we're here to hopefully motivate you, coach you a little, and I don't know if this is an over exaggeration, but we want you to get jazzed up about fire response. Because Ray and I, those times that we sat in our fire stations waiting for the alarm to ring, here's another fun fact. Firefighters, according to the National Fire Protection Association, they only do the job that they're trained for 3 to 6% of the time that throughout their entire career. The rest of the time, we're training, we're maintaining equipment, we're standing by, we're preparing to respond to emergencies. We want you to promote the mindset that the first question that you ask when the fire alarm sounds shouldn't be, is this a drill? We want you to remind yourselves and your team that every time that alarm sounds, you got to take it from the perspective of it could be the real deal. One of the examples that I've been using in this particular session is a real world incident that unfortunately just happened a week ago in a large hospital in Massachusetts. At no time did the people, including the fire and life safety person like Greg in the back there, anticipated a scenario where the hospital would have to be completely evacuated. But if you follow me on LinkedIn, you know that I posted a few articles about this 10-alarm fire. And really, a 10-alarm fire is a pretty big fire.
Huge.
Have you ever been to a 10-alarm fire? I have not.
I've only been to 4 or 5. San Francisco only has 5.
Well, a 10-alarm fire in a healthcare facility is extraordinary. And this entire hospital campus, probably in size and scope, maybe not in operation, but the physical plant is probably very similar to Laguna. And I asked you this, Greg, could you ever imagine evacuating any entire facility, whether it was San Francisco General or here or any place?
No, I could not.
Well, it happened. And the interesting thing about it was kind of a routine fire. It didn't even happen in a patient care area. It happened in an electrical room in the power plant of the facility where an arc flash caught the fire. Ray, why don't you explain what an arc flash is?
Anybody know what an arc flash is? No. So you have the potential with any type of electricity, including a light switch, that when you turn it on or off, you can get a disconnection, you can get a short. And in this case, this was a very large box or transfer switch. And when they went to test it, an arc flash. And I've been in an arc flash, and really the only way you can survive is to actually have all the gear and everything else. So I know what an arc flash is. And it's an amazing thing. When you get home tonight, look it up on YouTube and just type in arc flash, and you'll see all kinds of different things. But basically, it's an explosion that happens in a split second. And it's very high heat. The color of the flame is pretty much white. It's incredibly hot, and whoever's there can be really, really you can be killed if you're not wearing the proper equipment. So it can happen anywhere that there's electricity. So a building like this, it's possible. It's, but you maintain it well. The good news is if you are maintaining it, you test these things. That doesn't mean you can't have it, but I've seen it with brand new equipment, and I've also seen it with equipment that's about 20 years old.
The director of facilities and the person responsible for fire and life safety at that hospital, basically Greg's peer, wrote in a LinkedIn piece, and he said, never in my wildest dreams that I would think that within 30 minutes of me reporting to work, I would be dealing with a 10-alarm fire. So the reason that constructors like us like to use examples is that we're trying to make that persuasive case to you, the audience, that it's a normal day until it isn't. And that's the attitude that you need to have when the alarm sounds. You can't just say to yourself, they must be testing, is it another drill? How many more drills do I need to do in my career? I've been doing it for the past 20 years, one per shift, per quarter. The reality is the drills that we conduct are designed to create a culture of response and preparedness. And unfortunately, one of those drills wasn't reacted to or responded to in a capacity that was satisfactory towards surveyors, and that's one of the reasons that we're trying to champion this initiative forward. Ray, I don't know how long you,
Give it a question.
oh, yeah.
How do you classify the number of alarms? 3 alarm fire, 5 alarm?
Oh,
It's based on the amount of equipment or companies that respond to it. So when an alarm comes in, it's usually, at least in my world, it's a still alarm. And usually you'll get like 2 or 3 engines, which are the pumper trucks. Then you get a couple of ladders. But when it's a place like this, a target hazard, or any hospital, you might get a larger initial response. But when they get on the scene and they see that they need more resources, then they call in extra alarms.
So San Francisco, typical response here for any box, and they call them street boxes or a box alarm. Yeah, it's the old fashioned term. I'm aging myself. I used to respond to boxes all the time. But this has a particular number that's associated to Laguna Honda as any street in San Francisco. Typical response for 1 alarm would be 3 engines, 2 trucks, a chief, a rescue squad, and possibly the division chief. If they have any communication from the facility that there is a smoke or there's a fire, they're going to automatically pull a second alarm, which is an additional 4 engines, another 2 trucks, and the deputy chief of the fire department. And then they can do special calls. The highest amount is 5, and then they do what they call special calls. But that's San Francisco. If you go to San Mateo County, a general alarm is equivalent to a 10 alarm.
So, I've been teaching fire safety from probably the mid 1980s to the present. On my department, I wore a number of different hats. I was a firefighter. I was a paramedic. I was promoted to lieutenant, to captain, to fire marshal. I was the arson investigator. I was the public education specialist. I go to your kid's school, your grandkid's school, and I teach them stop, drop, and roll, touch the door. The same principles that we have incorporated into our fire emergency response here is the same things that we teach kids. But for the longest time, teaching fire safety, trying to motivate people to do something, to get people like yourself to understand that, whether you know this or not, every person in this room, in this community, in this facility, and probably even when you badge in your locker, hang up the lab coat, and you're driving home and you witness that car crash, you see smoke coming out of the building like Jay has observed a few times in his life. You do something. Most of us don't ignore it. We're wired to be first responders. And that's the attitude that you need to bring back to your units and to the people that are within your span of control. That, I know I'm using some cliches here. It's a normal day until it isn't. You're a first responder. You got to think like a first responder. As our program continues to evolve with the management staff here, we're going to get into other elements of emergency operations. There's a session that we'll do sometime in the future where we're going to tell everyone they need to think like an incident commander. Because in a blink of an eye, any person in this room might be in charge.
That's correct. Yeah, and we're going to actually have a new emergency operations plan for this facility, where it's actually going to give you the empowerment. It's actually going to be written in the language that says you can take charge. You can be the incident commander. For every incident, there's always a person in charge. I don't care who it is. It could be the most entry-level person that just walked in the building and is at the right place at the right time. Or it could be the chief level and right in between, everybody in between. So you always have an incident commander, no matter what. I mean, if you've had a wedding, you've had an incident commander. You can run incident command at Thanksgiving. There's always somebody in charge. So then you have another person called operations. But we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that later. But the bottom line is that you and your staff and everybody you work with needs to know that they can take the initiative and not wait for someone. They can take the action and do it real quick.
Bottom line is if someone doesn't, if a single person doesn't take charge, pretty much nobody's going to take charge. And multiple people can't be in charge. We're going to evolve, you're going to get to the point where your emergency operations plan here is going to be much more optimized, much simpler. But the basis of any good emergency operation plan is the same principles that we're going to reinforce today. The concepts of race, concepts of pass, how to recognize an emergency, how to respond to it with certain elements at the top of the priority list. And the one element that you've always got to consider as being most important is, of course, going to be life safety. That's why the R in rescue, in RACE stands for rescue. You gotta focus on people first. You gotta initiate an alarm. You gotta contain the circumstances or the situation, and then you've got to mitigate or extinguish. Race pretty much is applicable in concept across any kind of emergency, whether it was your experience at Loma Prieta, whether it's your experience at some of the wildfires that you responded to, no matter how big the situation might be, race kind of is the framework of response.
Yeah, you can use it for pretty much any disaster, and the fire is a disaster, earthquake, active shooter, missing resident, utility failure, cyber threat, pretty much anything. But right away, you have to start thinking of rescue, getting people out of harm's way, getting the area prepared for a response, notifying somebody, verifying that they got notified. There's many different ways of doing that. And then containing, like Stan said, and also extinguishment or evacuation. And so those are all simple things using across the board. It's very, very simple, actually.
So when I was fireman friendly, or when I was in a room like this, where I do staff inserts, I work with providers all over the country, Life Safety International Fire Consultant, California Association of Health Facilities. I do the same thing in Utah and Arizona. I've got providers from coast to coast. When I train people about fire safety, especially from this perspective, that I'm working with a long-term care facility, it's always been academic. Still, I sat on the other side of the table. A few years ago, my father was afflicted with ALS and he needed skilled nursing care. And all of a sudden, and this was a facility, this nursing center was my client's facility. All of a sudden, it hit me full force. This is an academic thought. This is real. These people are totally not only responsible for the care of my dad, but they're also responsible for emergency response. So I'm going to show you a video clip of a news story of a tragic fire that occurred in a skilled facility back about 20 years ago now. And the perspective of this news story is it's 10 years after this terrible fire. But the connection, which really resonates with me, is the connection of a firefighter, a fire chief, like myself, who was a responder to this incident. But I gotta warn you, it might make you shift a little uncomfortably in your chair when you see the circumstances of this particular fire, because nobody in the 20th century or beyond should ever be subjected to a fire death in a healthcare facility.
The images from that night in September are still haunting.
Yeah, they have been engraved in the minds of every firefighter who was there.
And that blaze at the NHC nursing home brought about some major changes.
Chris County to reform.
And Rory, 16 people died as a result of that fire, some of them that night, others weeks later. Have to remember here that most of these people were in part people that couldn't walk or get out of the building on their own, and there were 120 of them. Receiving 20 seconds, 10 years ago tonight. With nothing short of the pure definition of chaos.
And the second time on the fourth floor, they were just looking out the window.
Seems like it happened yesterday. It seems like a long time ago also. And it's decades of the district fire chief. I knew had a working fire. I knew it was bad. Bobby Conley cannot recall all the fires in the district. The worst call that comes to our speakers in the fire station is a nursing home fire. Inside that burning nursing home on the second floor was a mom.
I remember looking for her. She had some purple burns on her, but she was completely black from the smoke.
The building had no sprinkler system. 16 people.
My brother firefighters gathered around and we had a problem.
And a decade later, Bobby can't help but find reason in his mother's death.
And positive, my mom always talked to that. Something good come out of it. And we had legislation that I don't think would have ever passed had that tragedy not happened.
Now, every nursing home in the state is required to have sprinklers.
It would have been a minimum fire, I think, with it had fire sprinklers.
We got it.
caused by the person, Bobby Conner, the town for giving. Like,
Something good come out of it, and I just think about the good things, if my mom is for me and worse for me, you know.
on top of the legislation that changed after the nursing home fire, Bobby said something else came out of this. He said they taught the fire department that in a major fire situation, they need to have one crew focused on putting out the fire and another focused on rescuing victims. To this day, no cause has ever.
Let's talk about some good news. Well, that's tragic. And actually, that was only half the story. That same year in 2003, ironically enough, 16 people died in another nursing home fire in Hartford, Connecticut. And one of the mitigating factors in that particular fire was that none of the staff, according to the NFPA report, knew how to use a fire extinguisher. And none of the staff closed the doors to the rooms down the hallway from the room where the fire had started. As we talk, I want you to keep your attention focused on the screen because you're going to see a fire, how it progresses in real time. You know, unlike with the way television and movies portray fire, I think of movies like Backtrack in the 1980s, remember that movie about Chicago firemen, and other movies or TV shows that characterize fires, you know, whether it's 911 or some of the other shows that are out there, firefighters seem to be dramatized lately. But the problem is the reality of the way a fire spreads is not being portrayed properly. Right about here, at about 1 minute and 20 seconds or so, if there would be a smoke detector in the space like we have throughout this facility, that smoke detector would activate and alert people to fire. Unlike the circumstances that you just heard in that tragic news story where 16 people died in an unsprinklered building, you need to know this building is equipped with fire sprinkler system. You know, your licensure is a skilled nursing facility. Your title is a hospital. My opinion, as a consultant working with life safety and disaster planning for decades with facilities around the country, this is a one-of-a-kind facility. This is a hybrid of the highest level of certain elements of fire protection and life safety that I just don't see in some buildings. The construction type, what do we have here, Ray? Type 1 or type 2? Type 1. Non-combustible. It's built like a hospital, but it's also kind of operated in the capacity we're talking about.
Yeah, it's built not to burn, it's built not to spread. And they, you know, when they did the codes, you're in California, you got one of the strictest codes in the world. And it's built to prevent things like this growing and amplifying. But
Right here, let me interrupt you, 2.5 minutes approximately. This would be the temperature that would produce enough heat that would convect upwards to the ceiling that would activate the fire sprinkler. So this NFPA video is showing you how a fire progresses in your home, in a residence room, without protection in real time. Quick question. What temperature does a fire sprinkler head activate? Anybody know? You should know, because if you're that first responder and you get to that resident room, you touch the door and it's warm, you've got smoke coming out the bottom of the door, indicating a fire, and now you've got water coming out, indicating sprinkler discharge occurred. How much temperature do you think is on the opposite side of that door? Anybody?
take a guess.
Throw a number out there.
50?
How much? 350, that's kind of high. We won't play games, 165 degrees. That's the temperature. Now I want you to remember, 165. And that's not going to be on the quiz, but it's information that will let you know that the fire, theoretically, in a facility like this will never progress to this point. But there's one thing that we have to acknowledge. Mechanical systems fail. The water pressure could be compromised. City water could be tampered with, but we could have a broken pipe. I don't want to spoil the end of a movie. Some of you might have seen it. There's a movie called Titanic. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but the ship wasn't supposed to sink, but I don't want to spoil the end of the movie. Right, what do we have right here? We're at 4 minutes. It only took 4 minutes to get to this level.
Yeah, and to get to the temperature here, you're probably at about 1200, 1400. So obviously not going to be sustaining life, but that's why the sprinkler heads go off. And there's different types of sprinkler heads, but they go off around plus or minus 1 degree, 165 degrees. And it's also not like a Bruce Willis movie like Die Hard or something like that. It's one sprinkler head at a time, whatever head is closest to whatever is burning. So if this, you have to play with me, if this caught on fire, kind of hard to do unless it's accelerated, but let's say it did. The sprinkler head that's closest to me is this one and that one. So those two, maybe one, would go off once it hits 165 degrees, but you're not going to have the entire building. There are some staff that think when you pull a fire alarm, that the entire building gets flooded. That is not the case. Hollywood, yes, when you pull a sprinkler head or pull a fire alarm, yes, the entire building is flooded. That is Universal Studios. Real situation, these two heads would go off, probably this one first, maybe that one. So that's something, but Stan just gave you a very good tip. When you're responding to these drills and to these actual possible alarms, feel the door first, and if you see water coming from underneath, remember 165 degrees. You know that the temperature is either 165 or a sprinkler head failed. Right? If you feel the door first before you go in and it's warm, then you know you're already got a fire in it. So it's a good tip to do what you're going to do when a fire alarm goes off.
The toughest question you may ever have to answer in your career, is that a door that you would open? You got all the signs and symptoms of fire on the other side. In code speak, a door is known as a protector. Walls in a facility, a healthcare facility, are rated typically minimally for 1 hour. That means it's a piece of Class X 5/8-inch drywall that is designed to be barrier. You need to know that your hallways are barriers, that your doors within the hallways are known as protectors, which keep protection over that barrier. Even the frame around the door has got a fire resistance rating. That's what's one of the biggest problems that we've seen in this facility and other facility when it comes to doors.
So yesterday I did a fire alarm at 5:30 in the morning. And I did a second one at 8:30. The 5:30 morning was, I think it was in the South Residence Building, SRB. It was on the 4th floor at the Pacifica, if you guys are familiar with that. The very first thing that happened was nobody closed the door. Not one door was closed in the fire door. Okay, the second thing was that whoever was asked to do, to respond to that fire, that person actually went through the floor and said, fire, fire, fire drill, fire, fire, fire drill. Why did you say that? I don't really know. The second drill that we did actually did much better, and that was the food service. And that actually went very, very well. But that person still said, fire, 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 oh, fire drill. But everybody had their ears open real quick and popped up when they heard the word fire. But the response was much better. But the very first one, they started to go through the procedure, but not one resident door was closed. And that's, one of the things that I would check off, because that's the reason why you have the separation. You want to make sure that if there is smoke, it's not going to go into any resident room. It's not going to, it's going to have a barrier. Your egress is going to be, have some integrity, basically.
There are so many sophisticated systems in a building like this, or even a standard nursing home, where you've got smoke detection inside the ductwork on the return air side of an air conditioning or heating unit. That if smoke gets in that system, it shuts those units down, so it doesn't circulate smoke throughout the building. You've got a series of doors that are held open, called cross corridor doors. And what happens when the fire alarm sounds? They close. You've got a level of fire separation in this building that I don't see in most nursing homes. But you've got those accordion doors, those wand doors, when the fire alarm sounds, it separates the building. Those same doors were installed at the Pentagon on the 9/11 attack, and those doors prevented fire from spreading horizontally. What you need to know as fire response champions is that this building is designed to resist fire, mitigated by a sprinkler system where the sprinkler heads activate at what temperature? 165 degrees. The bigger picture, and Ray, in his role as a facilities director, you probably had a few sprinkler discharges on your watch. The fire ends up being the least amount of the problem. The water damage is the bigger problem. The trade-off is 16 people will never die in a situation like that. So you got to understand that you got to coexist with the system. As operator, not alone your roles are here in this room, but if you're responsible for anything that involves storage, there's a clearance number that you have to maintain under the sprinkler head. What number is that? Everybody knows 18 inches. Sometimes we put up red lines. Other times we just are educated. No, Ray, why do we need that clearance zone below the sprinkler?
So every single sprinkler head that you have, and some of these that you have in this room are not visible because they're concealed with a nice decorative cover, which is a fusible link and that's going to melt and come off. But basically you want to have that clearance. That 18 inches is going to provide enough clearance for that sprinkler head to give a spray pattern. And that spray pattern is really there not only to put out a fire, but also to provide egress and to get you out of a building that is on fire. So it's incredibly important to have that. There's another couple of reasons not to go over the 18 inches because sometimes they're not covered with a nice decorative color, that they're actually appended that you can see. And if you throw a box up there, you're going to hit it. And then many times as first responders, I've responded to many buildings that have had a sprinkler head knocked off by a mop or a box or anything else that is above because what happens is not many people are 6'5" and they take the box and they throw it up there. And it doesn't really matter what's in the way, and many times it's a sprinkler head. So 18 inches, red line, that's great, but I have seen it where there's many times it's above. So you have to really be careful with that.
I just want you to have situational awareness of these things. We saw some pretty serious potential deficiencies. So when I was here last month, I did some walking around with the facilities people. We found wedges indoors, saw doors popped open. We saw in the latching part of the door, people jamming stuff in the door so that you can conveniently just push it open. Talk about positive latch for a second.
Yeah. So once again, going back to the doors are part of the system. Your building has a system. That fire alarm program that you have is only as good as your building is maintained. So one of the things that you have to really look for is positive latch. And what that means is when you go to a resident's room and you close the door and it doesn't latch, it just kind of bounces open. That is not a good thing. So that's something that you want to report to environmental services and let them know to get a work order to fix that, because you want that door to have a positive latch, which means that the door closes, the strike is engaged with the door latch, and that you can't push it open. And that way the pressure from the fire or the heat or the smoke is not going to open it either. So that it also creates a smoke gasket around the edges of the door. So every single door, I mean every door has to have one of those. And I have seen it in this facility, believe it or not, where I found gloves and I found tissue paper and I found a business card, one of them had a person's name on it. So we'll have a little visit with that person. But these are things, and I also threw away 6 wedges. So if you see a wedge, and the ones that I threw away actually had a name on it, that return to. So it's kind of interesting, but it's like a prized possession. Some of them were very nice, very nicely handmade. One was painted, beautiful. I threw it in the garbage. So if you see that, let your staff know those things are not okay. That's going to prevent positive latch. It's going to possibly prevent people from getting out if you have the wedge in the wrong position. So there's a lot of different things, and that's all part of your fire alarm, fire prevention program, that the building has integrity. This only works if your building has integrity. If there's holes in the wall, if there's an outlet that has a broken cover, if there's a ceiling tile that is missing or cracked, if there's a gap in between the discussion plate, those little things are called discussion plates, that's where you can have fire go up and out or smoke come down. So it's something that you really have to look at.
I don't know if you knew this, but you're special. Skilled nursing facilities and the ones that I primarily work with, I don't work with too many hospitals, but the nursing homes that I work with across the country, they've got the highest level of regulation and oversight of any type of healthcare provider. As a matter of fact, they are only skilled nursing facilities, and that particular licensure is only second to the nuclear power industry when it comes to regulations. So not only do you have your own people looking over your shoulder, you've got consultants, you've got surveyors, you've got people that want to litigate against you and sue you. I mean, I get it. It's a tough business. But the bottom line for the context of this session is you got to think with the first responder. because you are first responders. One of the things that I teach, and Ray kind of echoes this when we teach together or we're teaching individually, is that compliance is critical. I think, Ray, your whole world, part of your whole world is compliance because you're in the same seat as Greg is at another facility that you, series of communities that you work for. Compliance is critical, compliance is essential, but compliance for compliance sake is a mistake. We're not a check the box organization. We've got to make sure that we're living and dying by the rules that are enforced upon us. Race. Let's get into race a little bit. Right? Talk about the basics of response, and I'm assuming, I guess, you know, in emergency management, we're never supposed to assume. Race is not a novel concept for any of you, correct? You've heard of race before.
And can you use race for any type of emergency? You can use it for earthquakes, you can use it for active shooter, you can use it for missing resident. Pretty much it's the essentials. It really is the basics, but you'd be surprised how many people forget that in a situation when it's a real incident. If there was a true fire or a true earthquake, you know, let's say you have that 7.8 earthquake that lasts a minute off the coast of Daly City, and it hits this building. Is this building going to move? A little bit, yeah, you might have some ceiling pop down. So start thinking about race. You know, can you use that in a fire situation? Absolutely. Start thinking of risk, moving people away from harm's way. So getting them into a safe location, closing doors as you're moving people out, as you're going down the corridor. Next thing you want to do is you want to notify somebody two different ways. One is to pull the alarm to let the building know that there's emergency. And you're going to verify that call by calling what number? You guys tell me. It's 4 dash. What was it? 42999. Yes, yeah, that's correct.
49.
Yeah, I knew the number, but I want to see if you know it. And what's the other number that I like to remember? 911. And the reason why I asked you to do that is because you want to verify that the alarm went off and is being actually listened to at the dispatch. There's nothing worse than having a fire alarm go off and having it not go through. It's a mechanical device. It can fail. So you verify that the call came through with a 911 call. You can actually get more information. While you're doing this, you're going to stay completely calm. You're going to talk at a very normal tone, and you're going to hang up last. You're not going to be, you know, yelling. You're going to talk very calmly, smoothly, and you're going to have all the information that they're going to ask you, including your driver's license number, whatever it is, and you're going to pass that on. And then you go into, you know, further with alarm. You're going to go into contain. You're going to close doors, and then you're going to do either evacuation or extinguish. Okay? But you can use that to pretty much any emergency. You know, just think about it. And then you can also use this at home. I mean, this is a small enough group. You can take these same things that we're talking about and apply them at home. Okay?
The rescue basically equates to your number one priority, life safety. In a fire situation, you want to rescue whoever's in the immediate fire area. You're going to remove them. You're going to close the door behind them. You're going to put in the call or sound the alarm. Ray's already made a case when you asked about what are the different levels of alarms. If somebody calls up and says, yeah, we do have smoke on the 7th floor, they're going to automatically upgrade to an additional alarm and send more resources. Contain. In a fire situation, contain, and the whole reason that we're so focused on the positive latch is that we want the fire or smoke condition to stay in its area of origin. One of the reasons that you engage former fire marshals like me or Ray to walk through the building and poke up ceiling tiles, we're looking for any penetrations, any holes that have gone through these barriers because we want the fire to stay in its area of origin. See or contain could essentially equate to mitigate. You know, if it's a first aid situation, we're going to apply direct pressure. We're going to bandage. We're going to do CPR. See, contain, mitigate is basically that element, and then evacuate or extinguish is a further level of mitigation where you're taking some proactive measures. Anything to add on that, Ray?
No, the main thing is, I think just, you know, you don't want to hesitate. And that's one thing that we don't want to see people saying, well, I got to finish this one email. I got to deliver this one package. I got to pack it in. For food service, it was a great example. We did the alarm right at food production, probably one of the busiest times that they could have. And I know you were there, I talked to you outside, you were the material man, right? And you guys, and they had a great response, you did a great thing, but everybody dropped what they were doing. And they were in the middle of food production for this entire facility. So it couldn't have picked the worst time, or in my mind, a better time. So it was really good. So drop everything.
It's incredible in my experience how people will automatically try to downplay an emergency. They'll do anything and everything to kind of get away from the reality of what's happening. On 9/11, would you be surprised to know that according to the National Institute of Standards of Training, it took 19 minutes for the average person not to walk down all the stairs of the trade centers to evacuate. It took 19 minutes for some of them just to walk out of their office. Don't have that attitude that this is just a drill. It's not real. As fire response champions, we want you to take every alarm activation as a real deal until you know otherwise. One of my biggest challenges, and Ray, you probably had the same challenges as a captain as I did when I was a captain, is making sure that our crew knew that even if this was the fourth time they were responding to Palos Community Hospital or Laguna Honda or Homa City Hall on a fire alarm, that fourth time could have been the real fire.
I think every single alarm was. You know, as firefighters, that's what you always do. You come in, we actually rehearse it constantly, so it's not, you know, it's muscle memory. Same thing for everybody that works in this facility. You know, it's the same thing if you're at home. You would do the same thing if you were cooking at home and you had a smoke detector. You're going to respond. You're not just going to say, "Oh, it's nothing." So you've got to really jump on it and react quickly, because a fire, as you can see, will double in size every minute. It's going to go very, very quickly. So.
Fire alarm activation, what you need to know is it takes priority over anything. And you might say, duh, no doubt. But the reality is that didn't happen when there was a fire activation here a while back. I've experienced it. One memorable fire that I had was in an office building. Roofers were on the roof of a 4-story office building. They were putting the tar down. They were using torches to mold the tar paper onto the roof. The next thing you know, the whole roof is on fire. We're on the scene. I'm the first on the scene as the fire chief. I get the size up. I got a 4-story office building, heavy fire on the top floor, ladders to the roof. We're going to get up there and get this fire before it spreads down. Another chief officer gets on the scene after me, and he says, "All right, I'm going to take command of this. You relieve me as incident commander." He says, "I want you up to the 4th floor and check on the crews up there." I get up to the 4th floor, and the fire is on this side of the building. And I've got crews out there that are pulling down the ceiling, hitting the fire with hose lines. And then I go out into the elevator lobby. I walk across the hall into another suite on the opposite side of the building. And I found a room 4 times as big as this, while the fire alarm is sounding, with about 50 people with headsets on who were acting like it was business as normal. The building was completely on fire. I said to command, I'm going to evacuate these people up here. They're acting like there's no problem in the building. Get them out of the building. End up saying, "Okay, I think everybody's out." And command said to me from the outside looking in, "You still have got somebody in the corner office." Who gets the corner office? It's the CEO of this telemarketing company. He said, "I'm on a conference call. I can't leave right now." I had to call the police up to remove a person from a building that was on fire. So we can't have that non-response attitude. We're going to review race in a little bit more depth right now. And I'll acknowledge this. The video that you're about to see is probably much more representative of the typical nursing homes that I deal with. You know, 150, 200 bed, 99 bed facilities. Not similar to the behemoth his property is, but conceptually, the concepts of race and pass that will be presented in this video do apply.
fire emergencies are serious. We never know exactly what we'll encounter when rushing to a fire. And you know that in fire emergencies, the actions we take to human life are good. When faced with a fire situation, what you do can be the difference between life and death for many of your residents. In the next few minutes, we'll look at an effective fire procedure. If seated by remaining calm and following step-by-step directions, you can keep residents and fellow associates safe. We hope that you are never faced with a situation such as this. But to be prepared, all facilities should develop a fire procedure plan, establish evacuation routes, conduct annual fire safety seminars for staff members, conduct monthly fire drills, and review the fire procedure plan frequently. While each facility will need to develop procedures specific to its own needs, there are certain crucial fire safety procedures that should be followed by all associates as they race for safety.
The first person to discover a fire must act quickly and appropriately. This person should call for help from other staff using an established code word. Once the code has been announced, all staff in the immediate area should follow the 4-step race procedure. Rescue the residents and close the door. Activate the alarm and confirm a backup call is made to the fire department. Close all remaining doors and windows and clear the hallway. Finally, evacuate as directed by the person in charge. As always, the resident's safety is of utmost importance. Make sure all residents in the fire room are removed from the fire area. Check the bathroom as well. If residents are ambulatory, simply escort them out. To remove non-ambulatory residents, use the sheet slide technique. First, remove top covers and prepare medical equipment for transport. Untuck all 4 corners of the bottom sheet. While remaining on the same side of the bed, roll the sheet up to the resident between the ankle and the knee and between the elbow and the shoulder. With both hands on the same side of the resident, roll them to the edge of the bed. Pull the resident's feet over the edge of the bed. Then move to her head and turn parallel to the bed with knees bent and both feet pointed toward the foot of the bed. Slide the resident's upper torso onto your lap and down to the floor. Using the sheet, drag the resident from the room. Remember to keep your back straight while moving the resident to reduce your chance of injury. As you remove the resident, close all doors, especially the fire room doors leading to the fire area. Failure to close these doors is a primary cause of death. Closing the door to the fire room will contain the fire and smoke to the room where the fire started. Reopening the fire doors may fuel the fire and permit smoke to enter the corridor. Extinguishing the fire should not be your focus in a fire. Removal of the occupants in the fire room and containment of the fire are staff priorities. However, a fire extinguisher may be utilized in the following situations. All occupants in the room have been removed. The door to the fire room has not yet been closed. There is a fire extinguisher in the immediate area. The fire is small. You have been trained to use a fire extinguisher. You are comfortable attempting to put the fire out. If any of these conditions are not met, it's best to close the fire room door and let the fire department address the fire. If all occupants of the fire room have been removed and the fire room door has been closed, do not reopen the door to attempt to extinguish the fire. This could allow smoke to enter the corridor. Again, the fire department should deal with extinguishing the fire. If you do encounter a situation where it's appropriate to use a fire extinguisher, remember pass. Pull the pin, aim the nozzle at the base of the fire, squeeze the handle, sweep back and forth. After hearing the code word, a nearby associate should pull the fire alarm. If the fire alarm is not sounded and you have removed all residents and closed the fire room door, set off the alarm. Each staff member should know where all alarms are located in each work area. When the fire alarm is pulled, the annunciator panel lights up. The annunciator panel indicates the general location of the fire. The panel is usually located at the switchboard or the nurse's station. An associate should announce the location of the fire and repeat the fire code signals. Review your facility's evacuation routes often, so you'll be ready to evacuate residents as needed. The charge nurse in the fire area is responsible for directing the evacuation. They will look at the location of the fire, the extent of the fire, and the amount of smoke in the hall to decide which residents should be evacuated. As you evacuate residents, take them to the closest room away from the fire area. Clear the hallway of people and equipment. Shut all windows and doors. Remove residents from the fire area, evacuating one room at a time. Remember, clear the rooms closest to the fire area. Mark the doors to show the room has been evacuated. Then take residents to a safe area beyond the fire smoke barrier doors. Close all other doors. In some situations, it'll be safer for residents to remain in their rooms. If there is smoke in the hallway and the resident's room is clear, the safest place is in a room. If the hallways are clear, follow the procedures previously discussed to evacuate the residents. Remember, do not evacuate rooms if there is smoke in the hallway. The residents are safer where they are. When the fire department arrives, a previously designated person will meet them and take them to the exact location of the fire. If you meet with the fire official, show them a route that'll bring the firefighters to the fire area without going through the fire smoke barrier. The fire officer and executive director must decide together whether further evacuation is needed. In most situations, if the race procedure is followed quickly and correctly, the fire can be contained with no loss of life. In a fire emergency, remember, rescue the residents and close the door. Activate the alarm and confirm a backup call is made to the fire department. Close all remaining doors and windows and clear the hallway. Finally, evacuate as directed. As you move your residents to safety, you should remember certain fire emergency guidelines. First, smoke and toxic gases are deadly. Don't walk through it. In addition, smoke rises, creating a clear area near the floor, so remember to keep low. If you are able to see the resident beneath the smoke, it is usually possible to crawl in and attempt to pull the resident out. If a person's clothing catches fire, it's important to suppress the fire immediately while protecting the respiratory tract. Grab the heaviest and nearest available material. Protect the resident's face as you lay the material over the top of the fire. Smother the fire downward. The main goal of your facility's fire procedure is to remove residents from the immediate fire area and protect remaining residents behind closed doors. However, certain areas, such as dementia units, may require additional precautions and procedures. In some cases, residents will not stay behind closed doors and could potentially wander into a dangerous area. It may be necessary to attend to these residents immediately, placing them in a room under staff supervision. Staff fire procedures should address all staff, including those who are not intimately involved with the fire. Department-specific procedures should outline any unique responsibilities, such as shutting down kitchen cooking equipment or laundry equipment. The procedures should also indicate department evacuation sites and assembly points. Evacuation sites are pre-designated areas in a separate smoke compartment of the building where staff should meet if there is a fire within their normal work area. By meeting at a specific place in the facility, administrators can quickly account for all staff and residents. Assembly points outline a location for staff to meet if the fire is not in their normal area. An assembly point may be one area for all ancillary departments throughout the building to use, or there may be an assembly point for each department. Having a pre-designated meeting place is important so the administration can account for all staff members and delegate additional responsibilities as needed. Your facility's fire procedures should be reviewed frequently. The charge nurse or executive director should make sure the critical parts of the plan are reviewed monthly. Also, the executive director should implement fire drills from time to time to make sure everyone's prepared in case a fire occurs. You give 100% every day to provide the best care possible for each resident you serve. Now, hopefully, you'll never have to deal with a real fire emergency, but by learning and practicing your facility's fire procedures, you are completing your mission to place the residents' needs as top priority. As firefighters, we are prepared to deal with any fire emergency you may encounter. However, this is how we would rather visit your facility.
Anybody got a fire story? Ever have a fire in a facility? Use fire story? Anyone?
First one here, as a nurse manager, but he wasn't happy with me. Because, one of our dryers for the fire, wasn't where the lid trap is actually on the dryer, and it was spark. And it sparked, and then, that happened pretty quickly, called the, code. I think it went really well. They called the code red, called the nursing office. The 42999. They called the fire engine, but it was small enough that one of our staff could go over and use the fire extinguisher. But while they were doing that, we have the fire doors. It wasn't enough to close the fire doors. It didn't rise to that level yet, but we knew it because she yelled the fire. And so we closed the fire doors, and then I had them evacuate horizontally, because we had the washing machine here, and then we had a household of 15 residents here and 15 residents on this side. So on both sides, we just had them evacuate the space to the other side, behind to the other household, which is like two fires.
So did the fire alarm ever activate?
We activated it ourselves. So it wasn't enough to. It was just the spark went off and somebody smelled it right away and then went over their side and then took the fire extinguisher, but we weren't taking any.
It sounds like it was a successful operation. The only thing I would say in hindsight and objectively, we always promote that before you use the fire extinguisher, so thank you for a perfect segue into the fire extinguishers, that you pull the alarm first. That's why we rescue alarm. Sometimes you get put in that situation where you've got a fire that's small that you want to mitigate quickly, but as long as you yelled out fire and then somebody activated the fire, it probably was all happening.
All at the same time, but you know what's interesting is the pull alarms are by the stairwell, and that was nowhere near the stairwell.
Was this in the old?
Alarm by the doctor's office. The first one by the doctor's office.
Was it your old? So everybody needs to. Because Ray and I, we've seen real world situations and simulated situations where a person would run right past the closest extinguisher or the closest. So let's talk classes of fire. Class A, common combustibles, wood, paper, cloth, lit, items in a closed building. Anything that's going to burn and produce an ash that you can put water on to extinguish would be a class A fire. Class B fire, flammable liquids, the type of fire that we would have in the kitchen, the type of fire that you could have in your kitchen, but the kind of fire that you might have with hazardous materials or in the shop with fluids or lubricants or other flammable and combustible liquids. Class C fires, energized electrical fire. As long as there's an energy source powering whatever is on fire, say a piece of equipment, an appliance, that would be a class C fire. We know that you could put water on a class A fire. You put water on a class B fire, a flammable liquids fire. Now, everybody in the classroom always says no, it's common sense. But I do a lot of work for insurance companies. I responded to these types of fires. I'm going to give you visual imagery of why you don't put water on a class B fire. Some people just are so compelled to do it, even though they know they shouldn't. They try it anyhow. Here's an example or an analogy. I live in the desert, so I live in Mesa, Arizona. We've got these little cactus balls that fall off of these bushes that are just a total hazard. They've got these hooks on them, and if you get them in your finger, you can't get them off. I shouldn't admit this to everybody, but Ray already knows this about me. I'm a Chihuahua guy. So I had a couple of Chihuahuas, and we were going to the bus stop to pick up the kids, and all of a sudden Tucky's getting in front of me, and all of a sudden I see one of these little needle grenades on the ground, and all of a sudden it goes right up into his stomach, and he's impaled by this thing with all these needles in it, like a hand grenade with needles in it. And I knew I shouldn't have done it because I knew I'd be injured, but I grabbed it and tried pulling it out, and all of a sudden I'm bleeding all over. People just don't believe that you can't put water on a grease fire. But you're going to learn from knucklehead A and knucklehead B that while that fire is propagating from that fryer pit, it's not normal. But I don't see a level of concern or urgency here. Well, he does pull the basket out, and knucklehead A says to knucklehead B, is this right? I don't think it's right. Now, this thing right here is the fixed fire protection system that's supposed to be pulled to extinguish that fire. Or your kids know this because fireman friendly like me used to teach people like you and your kids this. What do? You put a lid on the fire. Well, at least he probably went to the big fire extinguisher. Right? We're not going to checks on A, and he's coming with the extinguisher to put the fire out. Right now, he's got a bucket of water. So that isn't proof positive that we don't want you to put water on a grease fire. There you have it. Ray, talk a little bit about.
Let me just jump on that tiny bit. One of the things is that we're doing this in a nice, quiet environment. There's no fire in here. But I guarantee you, if there was an actual fire, depending on a class A, B, or C, it doesn't really matter. Your adrenaline is going to be up, and people aren't going to think. Your blood pressure is going to be up, and people will talk more rapidly. They're going to react instinctively, and instinctively is to take Stan's bottle of water and throw it on there. So I'm allergic to electricity. I don't use water with electricity to put it out. I certainly don't put it on flammable liquid. But you'd be surprised if people do, if they choose the wrong extinguishing. So it's muscle memory. You got to go through this, remind people, while it's calm, there's no fire. This is how you do it. Okay. It looks, like it's kind of a no-brainer, but this happens. San Francisco averages 14 fires a day for the entire city and county, and 80% of them are food related. Most of them are this. Yeah.
So we've got a process. We know race. Now let's talk about paths. The good news is this: you are equipped with multiversal ABC type extinguishers. You use this extinguisher on all three classes of fire. You can also use this extinguisher on a fire in the kitchen, but we don't want you to use that, or the kitchen staff knows not to do it. They've got a special extinguisher for a deep fat fryer fire like that. It's called a Class K extinguisher. The way to use an extinguisher should be second nature to you, because someday in a blink of an eye, you might be asked to put out a fire. Ray, talk about the pass procedure. We don't want them to fail. We want them to pass.
Exactly. So there's real simple. It's very simple. It's really not that complicated. It's not rocket science. Number one, whenever you pick up an extinguisher, the cabinet is never locked. You'd be surprised how many times people think, I got to break the glass. Do anything, just open the door. Okay, it's really simple. These weigh about, 15 pounds. Sometimes they're a little bit heavier, sometimes they're a little bit lighter. This is an ABC, which will put out Class A, B, and C. You hold it from the bottom handle. You don't squeeze it like this to try to take out the pin, because if I did that, it's not going to happen. I'm pulling on this pin right now. There's no way. But if I lift this up and I hold the bottom handle, and the easiest way, and some people have a different level of weightlifting capacity. So the way I usually teach people is I take this and I put it on the ground, and I put my feet on either side, and then I take the pin and I twist it. Okay, and then I pull it. It's really, really simple. You can also just hold it from the bottom handle and pull it straight out. But I found that the best way is actually take the pin and twist it. When that happens, this little plastic piece will drop off. It's not, you don't have to keep it. I've also seen people hold the pin while they're trying to put out the fire. And then you don't use it like this. You basically remember pass, P-A-S-S, press or pull, right? Then you're going to take out the hose with one hand, You're gonna aim, and then you're gonna aim it at the base of the fire. So if this table were on fire, if you're watching Chicago fire, if you're watching Backdraft, you'll never see the firefighters do this. They're only shooting it like this because they're really not firefighters. So basically what you want to do is aim it at whatever's burning. So if this table were on fire, aim it here. I'm going to get my body down low because where does smoke go? Up. I'm a little tall, so where would the smoke be? Right about here. Okay, so I got to get down, and I use the doorknob as a reference. I want to get my body below a doorknob height, and I'm on the ground. And then I'm going to come in low. I'm going to try to sweep it, and I'm going to press, aim, squeeze, and then sweep. It's really, really simple. Okay, and this will last about 20 to 25 seconds, has a range of 6 to 20 feet. Okay, super simple.
The good news is the majority of your extinguishers are class ABC, as characterized by the red container. Class K is in the kitchen, and it's known as a clean extinguishing agent. So if we had a vat of grease that was burning, and that silver bullet was discharged on that grease in the food production area, it does not contaminate you like the ABC yellow powder. Right, what would look like if somebody discharged an ABC versus class K, then I'm sure.
So, has anybody in this group ever used an extinguisher? No, yes, one, okay, and it's usually kind of a lime green color, it's all very, very fine powder, and it comes out and it pretty much expands. So if you use this in a kitchen, you're gonna have that contaminant all over the kitchen material, and you're gonna have to close the kitchen while you decontaminate and get it recertified by the state to open. So you're looking at about 30 to 35 days before you'll be able to reopen that kitchen. So it's really important that you use the right extinguisher. Not to say you can't use it if it's the last resort, but there are other agents that you can use, such as a cancel system along with the class K. Okay. So in the kitchen, the staff, and good news, I did the drill yesterday and they responded incredibly well. They used the Ansel system, they simulated using it, and they also simulated bringing over to class K. They pulled the alarm, they notified people, they closed the doors, and they left. And they turned all the equipment off. They did a fantastic job. They did a really good job. So use the extinguisher correctly. This is also a little bit heavier than that other one. You're probably going to have to use 2 hands to do that, but it's the same type of action. Press, aim, squeeze, sweep.
So we've established that this property, this building, this campus has been constructed to withstand fire. We won't even talk about all the safety measures that are in a building like this for seismic stability, right? Right?
Yeah, this building is very well built.
Very well built. It's got mitigation such as smoke detection system, heat detectors, fire sprinkler heads. Let's all impress Saki here real quick. And what temperature do those fire sprinkler heads activate at? 165 degrees. So we've got 165 degrees, we've got a water discharge. They don't all activate like television and the movies comedically portray them. Ray was referring to, I think, that one scene in the original Backdraft movie where Bruce Willis does this, the fire alarm, whole station, and all of a sudden, all the fire sprinkler heads activate. We've already established they're individually heat activated. They cause more of a medicine, more of a property loss, but the fire sprinkler system is a life safety system. It's not even a fire protection system. It gives you, the staff, enough time to evacuate the building.
Let me just jump in. I don't know if you're hearing the sounds that I'm hearing, but those are actually the testing of the fire dampers. And you notice that there's no air coming into this building right now, or this room. That's part of the testing of the program. I'm going to call it a program. So your fire dampers are being tested. That's probably what you went out to see. What was that
Yeah.
noise?
That's usually what I hear when the fire alarm goes off.
Yes.
You know,
So all those smoke dampers, and if you notice, you don't feel any air circulation going in this room. It's because the fire dampers have closed and isolated this zone to prevent fire from going through. So they're doing their job. They're testing it like they're supposed to. It's also a code-driven test that they have to do. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, perfect example, because an environmental facilities manager notices that the air is not moving. I didn't really notice that, but that's.
I know Greg did.
I heard the.
Yeah.
What do you think, the predominant cause of fires in healthcare facilities in 2023 is? What's the one thing that causes the majority not the majority, 20% of the fires that happen in an outdoor facility. What is the cost? What do you think? Yes,
It's illegal.
let's go ahead.
Cigarette smoking.
I'll say it. People in our first session that said it immediately. Usually I get laundry, kitchen, lift. It's your residence, you know, show you one last video. This is not a complete fair characterization of your facility, because this is an assisted living facility. But in this scene, you're seeing a guy who is completely unaware of a fire, and this is sometimes the reaction of your residents. Now you wonder why fire safety geeks like me are all crazy about blowing candles unattended. There's an unattended or a candle in this room where this guy is an Alzheimer's patient. The window is open, there's a gentle breeze coming in from the curtain, and all of a sudden, that curtain came in contact with a flame, and again, you're gonna see how fast the fire really moves. Within a minute, look up towards the balance where that curtain is on the left side, you already see the smoke. It's gonna take less than 60 seconds for the flames to start dancing around at the ceiling. Here it comes. Now, look at the resident. Not a skilled nursing facility, it's not a hospital, but it's an assisted living home. He's completely unaware of what's happening. It's gonna be tough to hear, but you might be able to hear it.
And this is, by the way, this is not Hollywood. This is a real incident.
Now, there's gonna be a staff member coming into the room. What she does, I don't want you to do. Can't do that. But she's yelling at it naturally. What I really want you to watch is what Warren does. Listen. He's not walking away. And look, he was walking right to fire. Now, it's a regulated assisted living home, as defined by less than 10 residents that might live right in your community, right next door in an assisted living home. And you would think, all right, well, this fire is starting to grow. We're only at 2 minutes right now. And somebody's going to come in with the fire extinguisher. This fire is manageable. Now, had there been a sprinkler system in there, which there isn't, it would have already happened. Get some water. Still west. Coming in from the water. The smoke there is just overwhelming. You can't see. And what else can you tell? Now, right now, are trained on how to read smoke, how to read. What didn't they do? They didn't close the door. That's why the smoke is coming this way. Look at the way the flame is moving. It's coming right towards the open orifice, which is the door. That's why closing the doors is so critical.
So just as an editorial comment here, what makes us different than one of these facilities here? All of our landlords have towels and curtains, all of that are fire retardant. Not fire proof, they're fire retardant. It takes a lot to get that stuff to light up. We did an experiment at the power plant at the hospital a few years ago. And it was hard to get this stuff to light. And it did not stay lit if you took the torch off. So it's really, and that would include like gallons and you know, other materials that need implementation or use. So something like this here would not, I mean, this bill, I'm not selling you this building. It is incredibly fire safe. Incredibly fire.
I'm going to add in one anecdotal thing to kind of pair this up with. Why was it so important to declutter resident rooms? Because that's all the things that are extremely flammable and that are not, prevented in this manner. So that's why we have to help support the environment to keep a safe environment.
The technical term is combustible load. There you go. So you want to remove that combustible load or at least lower. And there are some residents that are hoarders.
Yeah.
You have to monitor that.
We have a facility on the general called the Park Adult Rehabilitation Facility. And these folks they're in a locked facility, but they have unfettered in and out privileges.
And the problem with that is that these guys go out, and they wander the streets and they find this dresser laying on the street and that blanket. And I mean, so not only do we get all this unsafe stuff into the building that we have to, hey, get this out of here. They also bring in stuff like bed bugs. We've had bed bug outbreaks that are just a nightmare to deal with. They're, you know.
Look at this, it's 3 minutes and 15 seconds. The other video that I showed you, it took 4 minutes with those common combustibles because the window was open, because there was a fresh air supply. So you've got about a 3 to 4 minute window till you get to a point like that. Again, building is protected. Sprinkler system will activate. It's like having a firefighter on duty with his or her hand on the bail of the fire hose 24 hours a day, where that sprinkler head activates at 165 degrees. According to NFPA statistics, 1 and no more than 3 heads are typically required to put out the fire. So with all that said, I want you to take that quick quiz, and then we'll wrap it up when I see that everybody's just about done. And see if you've got any final questions or comments.
Need a pen.
Yeah.
You got it.
What do you got? While you're doing that, if you have any questions, you can start formulating them.
What, you said AMSL, what's AMSL? I remember seeing that one, it's ANSUL. What
You
is
got
it? What?
It's a kitchen cooktop extinguishing system. It's for putting on kitchen fires, on griddles and,
Basically the same agent that's in this container.
Oh.
Except it's on the wall, and then it goes through pipes, and then it's above each appliance.
So what are the tips on the?
oh, okay, they have a rubber boot that goes over the nozzle to keep grease, you know, from accumulating on it. And so what happens typically is that the kitchen staff will be cleaning whatever, and these nozzle caps will pop off. All you have to do is put it back on when you're done cleaning. But, you know, that was a survey for it. And then a week later, I went and looked at it, there it was again, I popped it back on. And so it's one of those attention to detail.
Because it won't work if there's three.
Well, it can get clogged up with grease. Yeah.
Right, the nozzle will clog up to grease and then it won't spray properly, or it might not spray at all.
And yesterday there were one.
Well, okay,
Yeah. It's just something that you have to build into your routine, that's something that's checked, you know, by food services people that are there. It doesn't take much to put them back on, you just put them on, and if they don't stay on, let environmental services know to just change the boot.
What we speculate and with what our experience has been is when you're putting it in immediate jeopardy, they're gonna look at you closer under the microscope. One of the things that they're gonna do is focus on your knowledge of the emergency plan, specifically race and past. So as part of this champion program, bring this knowledge back to your span of control, your area where you operate. Encourage others to take this seriously. Remind people that they've got the code card, that surveyors will allow you to look at it. It's almost inevitable. Every time that Ray or I do a mock survey and we walk up to someone unsuspecting that they're gonna have to have any interaction with us and say, what's the code for fire? What does race stand for? Tell me past. More times than not, it's like, oh my gosh, I know this. I know this. Well, you gotta coach people that they've got that knowledge right there. Yeah, please, on the fire. I didn't even get into what the typical response is to an emergency where people aren't expecting something. They don't panic, they don't run for the exits. More times than not, people will freeze. So I can't afford anyone to freeze. It's a small group, and each of you get to participate. What's your thing? Don't freeze.
Mine is good takeaway.
Give me a main takeaway.
Great, that you fit in and.
Yep, it's kind of a framework for emergency response. Stay calm, remember that we've got process, we've got mitigation, we've got responders coming with those long red fire trucks they have here in San Francisco that I wish I could be on that 911 day. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, it's really important. But actually, I really wanted to say, we We need to tell the staff, stop saying, this is a drill, this is a fire drill, you know? That's the thing that just, code red drill.
It escalates the response.
Yeah.
It's just a drill.
Say, yeah. Yeah, yeah. That's what-
I don't prefer that they didn't say fire.
Right,
And that's what they
right,
said
right.
yesterday in both scenarios, everybody yelled fire, fire. Code red drill will work.
That's why we didn't call this fire safety training, we call it fire response training. We need to respond like it's the real situation every time. What's your takeaway? What resonated with you?
Okay.
Yeah.
Quoting.
The basics, and that's exactly what we tried to accomplish today. We tried to lay out a scenario that it's a normal day until it's not. You might be just like that hospital in Brockton, Mass, where all of a sudden it was a normal day until they had to completely evacuate a 350 bed hospital, close down the state's busiest emergency department, and now it's putting a drag and it's stressing the entire healthcare system. Can you imagine if we had to evacuate this hospital, what would it do for the entire healthcare infrastructure in this state? It'd be a big deal. Big deal. Greg, give us your last impression.
Well, this particular training, there was nothing new because I've been through the training before with you, but what I will tell you is I'm impressed by this last video. The 88-year-old man sitting there, just, and that guy he's one of our residents. He represents many of our residents, and he was completely oblivious, and I'm in awe of the folks that care for these guys, and take care of them and are working to make sure that they're safe. And along your line, yeah, the woman that came in, our care provider, that screamed, ah, and she ran out, that probably wasn't the best thing she could have done, but it seemed like she recovered. And she came back in and got him out of there, and he wanted to go over and check out the fire. Yeah, he might have been a retired person. That might be you and I. Who knows, but that I was taken by that video because I missed it on the first.
I can show it.
Oh, okay.
So, close this out, more times on a much smaller facility with the chair of, with the people of a traditional. But I bet you'll agree with me. People that work in long-term care, people in skilled nursing facilities, they're with a blessing. You are blessed that you get to work with people that you genuinely care for, that you got compassion for, and in some cases, I've seen it where your staff love those residents.
Yeah.
Your nurses, man, those residents, that connection with the residents. It's not like a hospital where you're dealing with one patient after another, the residents. And that's why it's so important that you understand first responders. Everything in this facility. Let's wrap this up with this, Greg. You gave the first session 2 homework assignments. Why don't you give this?
So your homework assignment is to leave. 2 things. Number 1, when you go back to your unit, you're talking to your staff in a huddle. I need you to find all your fire extinguishers. Walk around your unit, find all your fire extinguishers. That's number 1. Number 2, find the pull station. I'll give you a hint. They're typically near an exit door. Like right there, there's an exit door, and there's a pull station right next to the door. Pretty simple. You'll find them. If they're on a residence unit floor, they have that protective cover on it. Keep your hands off. But those are your 2 homework assignments. You go home. And then the third one was.
The third one is make sure that they're not locked, that they're actually visible. So, when you go up and you look at the fire extinguisher, make sure there's no cart in front of it, that in front of the pull station, there's no IV stand, that there's no food service truck, that there's no food service truck or any other cart in front of a fire. So those 3 things are super important.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me.
Sure.
Okay, that's an extra assignment.
If you would give me your quiz as you leave, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And just last minute logistics here,
The expectation is that you guys will now carry this as fire champion, fire champion peer unit. We will be giving them help with all the materials and the videos and the classes that are available to you. But starting even in a huddle, you can go do these things, you can take this sheet. This is something you will do continuously. And if you need any help, reach out to Greg and with it very kindly, let's not walk in with the other thing that we've been mentioning. So if you need them to come back to your unit, you need to follow those items. If this is going, think of this, the same thing as medication, double check and verify on very high risk medications. This is same importance. This is a new thing on your tool belt. That's actually what I took away today. I've always felt this is important. I've done it at a million different organizations and training. But for the first time in my life, that wow, this is just as important as the things I learned in nursing school. Like this is a safety response, just like someone having a heart attack. So pick up with you. You guys got great champions. Reach out if you need something.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good.
Very much.
So that you-